Awesome. So thank you guys for joining in. I'm going to make this a meaningful 60 minutes. Again, feel free to interrupt me at any time, or you can just go into chat. Either one. I'll have that open and I'll take a look. And then I also want to welcome those that are watching this recording. Had several people who had registered, were planning on attending, and then couldn't. And we know this noon hour is really challenging. So if at any point you can't see my screen, you can't hear, whatever, just let us know. But I'm super excited to get going. So this is one of my favorite anchoring techniques right here. And anchoring is just a way to kind of center yourself. It's also a really good practice to just kind of balance out both sides, both hemispheres of your brain. And so if you don't mind, just like kind of rub your hands together for a second. And I just want to invite you to take a couple of deep breaths, to pause and reflect, because the topic that we're talking about today, in my opinion, is hands down the game changer. It is the most important thing we can do to help us get the results that we want. And when we don't recognize it and when we don't do it, it's so costly. I will tell you, experience that with a client that I'm coaching just yesterday. And the problem is when we don't recognize this and we don't have better tools and strategies to deal with this little thing called threat, it's so incredibly costly that it can literally take generations to clean up the mess. So just taking a moment to just pause and think about where in your life right now are you unclear? Whether that is a project that you're working on, whether that is a personal situation that you're dealing with, but just thinking about where in my life right now am I unclear? And if there's something that's not too personal that you don't mind just putting in chat, that just at least it would give me an example to work with that may be relevant to the folks that are on today. But just where in your life right now are you unclear? And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But first, I'm going to just share some beliefs, just share some statements as you kind of center and we get ready for this time together. A couple of beliefs that are super important. One is this: wherever you are is exactly where you need to be. So I need to hear that today. I'm trying to finish up a book, and the pressure that we all dump on ourselves, I'm doing it too. And just recognizing that wherever I am in this journey, wherever I am in a process, that's exactly where I need to be. Just let that sink in a minute. Second one that I love is this one. Deep breath. You have plenty of time. We have plenty of time. If we could just operate off of that rather than this feeling of always feeling behind and always feeling like a victim of our schedule, just recognizing we have plenty of time. Here's a third one that I love. Don't believe everything you believe. So last week was April Fool's, and it was fun to do a video there. Thank you, Amy. I love that. It was fun to do a video on April Fool's because on April Fool's, someone might have lied to you, and it was really, really funny. But the truth is, our beliefs and our thoughts lie to us every single day, and the results are sometimes not funny. So just recognizing that even if you adopted a belief as a child, you don't have to have it forever. You're not wearing the same clothes that you wore in the second grade. So let's not hang on to the same beliefs sometimes that we adopted somewhere in that time frame in our life. I have two more here before we jump in. One is this: where a problem exists, the solution exists. Like if we could really operate off of that belief, then the problem would get our attention, but the solution would get our energy. And even to just start asking when you're faced with a problem, maybe it's an area where you're unclear. Even start asking, what's the way? Not how is the way, or how am I going to get there? How am I going to make it happen? But rather, what is the way? Where a problem exists, the solution exists. And then one more is a reminder that you are 100% successful in making it through tough days. And these are just some of the statements that I write from time to time in my journal, along with about 50 others. But just some reminders. We've got to be able to outsmart threat. And sometimes that is simply by really validating what are true beliefs. And so if you're in the right place, if you heard those statements and you think, I agree with all of that 100%, and you're in the right place if you heard those statements and you're like, I'm very suspicious of those beliefs right now. So, those of you who've worked with us before, you know that every single day we get to get up and we design learning experiences and we deliver learning experiences. And it really is just one of the greatest things that we do. My mission is to equip people to lead, learn, and live the way the brain works best. Because when we do that, we really can get better results with less effort. And the opposite is equally true. Hi, Michael. Thanks for jumping on. It's either Michael or Christine or both. Anyway, thanks for jumping on. Just recognizing that when we don't lead, learn, and live the way the brain works best, we're creating some of the pain and suffering that we may be complaining about. And honestly, out of every single thing that we do every day, the number one problem we seek to solve is recognizing and addressing the topic that we're focusing on right now, recognizing and focusing on threat. So I just wanted to do about 3 things in the time that I have with you. I want to do about 3 things. One is that how does the brain respond to threat? This is so important that we understand this. I think this is something that everybody on the planet needs to recognize. I wish I had learned it sooner. And while we still have so much to learn about our brain, the truth is we know a lot. Let's start with applying what we already know. So, how does the brain respond to threat? What even shows up for our brain that it perceives negative threat? So I wanted to touch on that for a minute. And then finally, giving you some practical solutions. Here are some of the real game changer tips that can really change everything. And so that's what I'm promising you today, and hopefully we'll deliver on that. So I just want to be sure that I can see everybody. So I'm messing around because my Zoom updated. I will tell you this in advance, though, suffering is optional. Okay, if ever you think I'm facing something that's unclear for me or for my team, let's talk. Okay, suffering is optional. There are solutions, and this is what we do every single day: is we get up and we gather new ideas, new strategies, new solutions so that you don't have to suffer. And so reach out. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and the right solution is just asking. So when you think about this idea of negative threat, that's so important because not all threat is bad. All right, some threat keeps us alive and we love that and we want more of that. Some threat motivates us. So if we have the threat of missing a deadline, or we have a threat of losing our job, or we have a threat of being attacked by something, those are great things. It alerts your brain. But there are certain conditions that we take a look at those, and those can have really negative consequences to our brain. And I want to share a little bit more about that with you today. One of those conditions that is one of 3 criteria that I see that can equal negative threat. One is that there is some element of confusion or uncertainty or the unknown. And so when I ask you to think about what's something in your life right now where you're unclear or you're uncertain, Just have that in mind as we go through the next few minutes together, because typically this is one of the things that can throw us off more than anything, is just even the tiniest bit of confusion, the tiniest bit of uncertainty, man, can send us spiraling and really impact our results. A second criteria for negative threat is that we don't feel like we have a lot of choice or voice. When we feel a little bit like a victim in a situation, like we don't have a lot of control over it. And sometimes this hits so fast, we don't even pause to think about it. So there's an element of confusion or uncertainty. There's a feeling of, I don't have a lot of control or say in this situation. And then a third criteria for negative threat is that our brain is automatically anticipating an adverse outcome. So, COVID was probably the quintessential example of a situation that triggered those three criteria. And then to make matters worse, it was triggering that for an entire world. So you can imagine why we saw some of the crazy things that we did. In the ebook that I put together, I identify what I see over the last 30 years as the most common situations at work that can trigger these three things right here. So some of you have had an opportunity to look through it, and you might want to download it now. It's in chat, but I'm going to go through these just really quick. And, if you're encountering one of these right now, I'd like to know. So just let me know in chat. You can just put the number or you could just type it in if there's any of these that are really relevant for you right now. So I listed the top 10. This is really kind of rank order the kinds of topics that we deal with a lot in coaching and in working with teams. One is that there's a lack of meaning or purpose. Now, even in industries where that should be so obvious, such as healthcare, some of you are in healthcare. Even then, sometimes we lose sight of the bigger meaning or purpose. And that is a situation that can trigger all three of those criteria for negative threat. When I don't feel like there is meaning or purpose, or I'm not seeing some level of accomplishment in what I'm doing. Therefore, when we're working with leaders, we'll tell them, make sure that you're always connecting what you're doing to the and here's why, so that you are always connecting to meaning or purpose. Another one of the situations that will trigger threat is this idea of favoritism or perceived favoritism. Remember, your brain is a pattern making machine, and it is going to identify a pattern. Even if it's not true, it feels like a pattern, it feels true. So whether it was true favoritism in how that person got promoted over another person, or it was just your perception, if your brain perceives it as favoritism, it is ripe for threat to just sneak in and take over. Here's just a few more. Micromanaging, or when you feel like you're being micromanaged, when you feel like nothing that you're doing is being recognized, or it's constantly being critiqued in a negative way. Ripe for threat. Humiliation, okay, probably goes without saying, but whether it was what someone intended or not, if my brain is perceiving, what we know is that it can elevate cortisol in shockingly high levels. And it can take up to 90 minutes for the brain to settle down once it feels like it's been in a situation where there was humiliation, cortisol spikes. It can take up to 90 minutes for the cortisol levels to return to normal. So let's just take a classroom situation where somebody, responds with an answer, and maybe that teacher says, that's not right, and that person feels humiliated. That spike of cortisol can last up to 90 minutes. So take it into the workplace where maybe you had the courage to speak up in a meeting, but your idea is shot down in front of other people. That spike in cortisol is lasting for a lot longer than what we think. So it's so important, I mean, there's so much written now around psychological safety, but it's so important to validate people's input so we don't do this. Again, not that your intention is to wake up in the morning and find somebody to humiliate, but it can come across that way. And your brain doesn't respond to somebody's intention, it responds to what it experienced in that moment. So, coming in at number 6 of these threats that's outlined in the ebook is a risk of loss. So, guys, I just want to talk about that for a minute because your brain has such an aversion to loss. And, loss can look like a lot of different things. But I will tell you that people will hang on, let's say, to a gym membership that they're paying for every month, even if they're not using the gym. Okay. They'll hang on to that membership because canceling the membership feels like a loss. So, like right now, I have a membership to, I think it's Hand and Stone Massage. I haven't used it for 3 months, but I'm not canceling it because it feels like a loss. And another personal example as I was putting this together, and I was just thinking about this crazy thing about our brain that doesn't want to lose. I've got a truck sitting in my driveway right now that is just aging as I'm talking, okay? But to sell that truck feels like loss, and there's a whole story behind it, but it's just interesting to think about this. One of the reasons why threat can show up when you're cleaning out your closet, just getting rid of material items equals loss to your brain. And your brain has such a loss aversion, it'll hang on to all the clutter before it will clear it out. It's the craziest thing. So I don't know if you have a gym membership or something right now that you're thinking about where you're experiencing loss aversion. But if you do, you are not alone because I know that feeling very well. Okay, so that's 5 of them. And I just wanted to end with the top one, and you can download this ebook. I encourage you and to even think about whether it's for you personally or for your team. How are these things showing up? And then give you some strategies around it. Number 5 here, I talk about a lack of resources. When there's a whole lot that is expected of you, and some of you are going to be nodding your heads right now because I know you're in this situation, but you don't have the resources to deliver on it. That might be, I've got all these deadlines and I don't have the team, capacity to deliver on this, or I don't have the personal capacity. Some of you are, you've got deadlines of deliverables. Well, you don't feel like you have the time resource, or you don't feel like you have the skill resource to deliver on it. That is a prime situation where we're going to see negative threats show up. When there are unclear expectations, and we do this all the time when we're delegating, like when we just expect other people to read our mind, or we're not being direct, or we're not asking for what we need. We're setting the ripe environment of unclear expectations. That's one of the reasons why I love the WWLL. Ask what winning looks like. We need to all be clear on what winning looks like. Change. Your brain really doesn't respond to, like, it doesn't react negatively necessarily to the change itself. What it's reacting negatively to is to the confusion or the uncertainty that change is bringing, especially if we're perceiving that change as a loss. It's going to trigger that loss aversion. When there's low trust, one of the questions we're asking just about everybody we interact with now is, what makes a leader worth following? I will tell you that the number one answer over and over and over, regardless of industry, regardless of age group, trust. It is that important. Okay? And then the number one threat, the number one situation that can trigger negative threat is social rejection. When I don't feel a sense of belonging. It's so important that we are creating a sense of belonging. It is not touchy-feely, happy-clappy, okay? Your brain responds to that in a way that is how it responds to negative threat. And so let's think about this for just a moment. I mean, any of these we could stay on for the next 30 minutes, but one thing around social rejection is that if you're an innovator, if you're a creator, if you are a leader, if you have a vision for something, the likelihood of encountering social rejection is very high. Right? Because if you've got a new idea, that means change. It might mean a risk of loss. It might mean somebody else feels humiliated. Like it can just trigger all of those things. So I just wanted to spend a moment on that. And here's the one thing, though. The one thing that can really change everything is something that Lance and I kind of jokingly a few years ago, but it keeps showing up over and over and over, termed FOBU, which is the fear of being, and I have several words here, right? If we can overcome this fear of being uncertain, uncomfortable, unpopular, like there are just going to be times, especially if you've got a vision for something or you've got an idea for something, it's not going to be accepted immediately. That doesn't make it bad, right? It is our tolerance of this fear of being unempowered or unsupported, kind of unfree. In other words, like we're restricted. If we can recognize where this is showing up in our lives, then we're better off in all those top 10 situations and the other, 100 of situations that I didn't capture in the ebook. So, like this idea of fear of being uncertain, fear of being unpopular. All right. So I wanted to share a clip from a podcast, and it's with Colin O'Grady. And if you just don't mind, when I get this going, just give me a thumbs up that you can hear. Okay. Okay, could y'all hear that okay? Yes? Okay.
What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
All right, Colin, great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome, man.
Great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted you to take us to a moment. You get dropped off in the middle of one of the most desolate places in the world. It's freezing cold. I can't imagine spending 20 minutes there with a group of people, let alone many days. But you're in Antarctica, and it's just you and a 375-pound sled. I'm curious, what are you thinking on those lonely days as you're trudging across the ice and snow and wind and brutal weather up in Antarctica?
Yeah, it was quite a mission. The aim was to become the first person in history to do the entire crossing of Antarctica. So from one coast via the South Pole to the other coast solo. And you mentioned the 375-pound sled, so unsupported, and that means no resupplies of food or fuel. So I had to literally load it up with as much food and fuel as I possibly could. What ended up being 375 pounds, and just pull it, man hauling. No kites, no dogs, nothing. You brought me to the very beginning. What was I thinking right at the beginning? Your point said the first hour, to be perfectly honest, was maybe the worst hour of my life. I had 1,000 miles to go, and in the first hour, I could barely pull my sled 10 feet.
You're thinking, like, I got to go. This is impossible, as it's named appropriately, but I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, literally, talk about, I had just done a bunch of big articles, interviews before I was heading off to this. I'd been interviewed at New York Times, and Today's Show was falling out, big press and things like that. I'm like, I'm gonna do this thing that no one's ever done, whatever. And hour one, I can't pull my sled. I mean, I can pull it like 10 feet. So it's embarrassing, man. But I started crying. Actually, is the first thing that happened. I started crying, and it's minus 30, minus 40 degrees outside. So it turns out when you start crying, what happens? Well, actually, all the tears, they actually freeze to your face, it's just like the all-time world's most pathetic of all pathetic feelings ever. I had a satellite phone with me, and I called my wife that first day, who's been a huge supporter of mine, built all our businesses together and all of our dreams, really. And I was, kind of explaining the situation. She calms me down. She says, just get in your tent, set your tent up for the first night, see if you can reset yourself. And I get into my tent that night, try to go to sleep, just like, okay, tomorrow morning's going to be better. And I have 1,000 miles to go. You only made it 1 mile, I think less than a mile the first day. And I wake up in my tent, and I will never forget, I always say, I was surrounded by all these people, and people are like, what do you mean you're alone out there? And I'm like, I was surrounded by every worst version of myself. I felt like I was sitting in my tent, and there was like 5 different versions of me, just like saying the worst thing. Colin, you're such an idiot. You're such a failure. One day, I mean, maybe you feel on the 30th day, but the first day, like you told everyone, you told the New York Times, like how embarrassing. And I think we can all relate to this moment, maybe not the moment of being alone in Antarctica, but that moment when you have a big goal, you have a big idea, you have an aspiration, something, or just, any part of your life. And then you're just your worst critic, right? You're just so hard on yourself. Those limiting beliefs of all the reasons why you can't or shouldn't do what you're doing, why you can't achieve your dreams, why you can't unlock your best life. That's what I was doing in that moment. And I am a big believer of this phrase. You probably heard it before, that we are the stories that we tell ourselves. We are the stories that we tell ourselves. And in this moment, day one in Antarctica, trying to do the most, the biggest thing that I've ever done in my entire life, that's where I was. And so I said, I got to cut through this noise. And so I love mantras. I've never done this before. I was desperate, man. I stood up outside of my tent, and I started yelling at the top of my lungs, Colin, you are strong. You are capable. You are strong. You are capable. Trying to rewrite this narrative. Now, I wish I could say that, in an instant, all the fears went away. The next 54 days were brutal pulling my sled, but I made it a little bit further every day. I woke up every single morning with that mantra. And look, there were a lot of low moments in that challenge of getting across Antarctica, but ultimately I made it. Ultimately, I got to the other side. Ultimately, I became the first person in history. And we can talk all sorts, there's a million stories in that journey, let alone some of the others throughout my life. But the essence of that for me, people say, how'd you do it? How did you do it? 375-pound sled, Antarctica, minus 40 degrees, minus 70 wind chill, alone, solitude. And I love to say the most important muscle that any of us has is the 6 inches between our ears. Like it was in the.
So I'm going to pause. It's really good if you want to go watch the rest of that. I think it's pretty amazing when you hear his story. And, you guys have your own version of crossing Antarctica. Some of you are trying to build teams. You're trying to deliver on projects. And you may not actually have a 375-pound sled, but you got a 375-pound something, right? That you're trying to accomplish with that. And it really is. It's so interesting to think about. We are the stories we tell ourselves. I just wanted to share with you a couple of things. When your brain perceives threat, the truth is, this amazing part of our brain that is allowing us to think and analyze and set goals and have the willpower to reach those goals, the part of our brain that's operating when we're acting like a mature, responsible, thinking adult is the prefrontal cortex. This allows us to be curious and open and fluid. Like when you've got lots of activity in your prefrontal cortex, you can easily synthesize new information with existing information. You're fun to be around, like you're a lot more fluid. You can see from different perspectives, so you're a lot more collaborative. The problem is when threat shows up, and if your brain perceives something as negative threat, right? There's confusion, you don't feel like you have a lot of choice, you're anticipating a negative outcome. Well, basically what you saw red earlier is now purple. In other words, there's a dramatic decrease in activity. The blood is rushing to preserve your body. And here are the behaviors you start to see. Well, we start getting really defensive. When it, like, just think about that in your own life recently where you felt like you needed to get defensive over something. We get very reactive. We get overly committed to being right. We all do it, so let's just acknowledge it. We feel like we're stuck. You lose the ability to see options. Remember, when your brain's under threat, your peripheral vision narrows. The same thing is happening internally. We just can't see options in that moment. You might actually use words like either or, when there are actually probably 100 different options. We just can't see them. So we miss opportunities. We're not collaborative. We are not our best self. Okay, we're that parent that's getting kicked out of the tournament, even though our kid is 10, right? And so just going back to these big deals that everybody really needs to understand about this equipment that is either going to help you get your results that you want, or it's going to hinder you from getting the results that you want. One is that your prefrontal cortex is priceless. We want activity, and the quickest way to shut that down is just add a little bit of confusion. Add a little bit of, I don't feel like I have a lot of control here. Add a little bit of anticipating negative consequences. And the big deal number 3 is that emotion runs the show. And emotion can either fuel the prefrontal cortex and we get better results with less effort, or emotion can fuel threat and all sorts of crazy stuff happens. You may even end up on the 10 o'clock news. It's so important. I want you to just think about this emotion thing as fuel. Okay, it's either going to fuel the worst part of us, and then we got cleanup work, or you just lost that job, or you just severed that relationship, or maybe you just even compromised the level of quality of work that you could produce. Or emotion can fuel the best part of who we are. Those, what I call those no matter what moments, when you had a big goal and you did it. And I just love Colin's story of, in that moment, recognizing these things and being able to make an adjustment faster. To me, that's when you really start to see the investment that you've been making in yourself pay off, is when you stayed here less time than you did last time, right? You recognized it sooner and you were able to course correct a lot faster. So let me just ask you guys, any comments or thoughts around this idea of emotion fueling, or, man, any of these conditions around threat that are showing up for you? All right. Yeah,
Well,
Suzanne.
well, I'll just say that um, you were right. I definitely was supposed to be here today. Or you said something at the beginning, like we're right where we're supposed to be. Like literally, I think I was meant to be here today. Um, I I could relate with the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh threat. Um, and it like as you kept going through them, I thought, wow, no wonder I'm so tired.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
It's exhausting.
It
Yeah.
it is exhausting, and it's not like these threats are like ongoing all the time, but they are definitely interwoven into my life and they pop up fairly frequently. So they're there enough that I'm just tired a
Yeah,
Mm.
lot.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And you know, think about changes in beliefs. Yeah, I remember when I first started my company in 2001, doing a workshop for a municipality. And there was a guy in there who said, I tell my men to leave their personal problems at home. Okay,
Mm.
well, that's a great idea in theory. But the truth is, if you're like, these things are hitting us. You think about some of those threats, you may not be experiencing them at work, but you're experiencing them at home. And if you're coming to work and you're going home with the same brain you're leaving and going with, it's coming with you.
Mm.
So we do have to have that holistic perspective. And I think you're right. Like we got to pay attention to the signs. And one of those is exhaustion. It's exhausting to carry all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, what about
Yeah.
you?
I loved your theory, and I've heard it in similar ways too, is like the more we can practice understanding where we get threats, the faster we can move through them. And I think for me, in a recent interaction, I had to journal because it helped me process the situation and almost take the time to say, okay, which, and now I have a more of a better tool, which of these 10 are my threats? What's behind that? So that, because they're always going to be there, but how quick can I like to say in the stands around the court is a term I have heard, I don't need to be in the stands, processing it. And then, but I could be doing something with it on the court. And one other thing that I thought was really powerful, because I have a tendency to process out loud. So I might call a few friends to like process these threats, but the 90-minute thing really stuck out. It's like, wow, okay, give myself some grace when I do need to process. It did impact me. Here's my threat. And yeah, to acknowledge it's going to take time. So thank you. And I need to be here today too. So, and I got referred to you by a net weaving conversation with someone. So I'm from the East Coast and just really appreciate this topic and your time. So thank you.
Absolutely. You're right. So let's take that cortisol thing, right? So you leave one meeting and you go to the next, or you're being hit with that all day long. And you think about the impact of that long term, which is one of the reasons why the CDC estimates right now that like 70 to 80% of our health expenditures in this country are stress related. We're just going from one to the next. Um, yeah, so good stuff. Good. Thank you guys. I just wanted to give you some of my favorite strategies. So I don't know if you've seen the movie Talladega Nights, but I'm hoping you have. But there's a scene in that movie that is absolutely hysterical. And if I'd had time to download the scene, I would show it to you. But anyway, Ricky Bobby is a driver, a NASCAR driver, and he has a wreck. And in his mind, he is on fire. Okay. He's running around, he takes his clothes off, he's running around, and he's stopped, dropping, and rolling. And then his friend Cal runs out to help him put out the invisible fire. But the truth is, when threat shows up, if we would pay attention, it is like we feel on fire. And this idea of this was a campaign, I think, in the 70s. I looked to see where this whole stop, drop, and roll thing started. But there is some value in it. If we would just recognize it and stop, right? And then, in other words, we don't literally need to roll around on the ground or anything. Maybe you do. I mean, maybe that works for you. But, just to recognize it, to stop for a minute, to drop into it. Like rather than getting defensive, that should be an external indication when we find ourselves getting defensive. That should be, that should be an external indication to lean in instead. Curious before furious. Like if you find yourself getting defensive, just let that be, some feedback in that moment to lean in. Tell me more. Get curious. Get curious around, like, which of these events is causing this threat? Is it really the change, or is it the confusion? Is it the uncertainty? Because if it's the uncertainty, then that allows us to think, what do I need clarity around? You know? So in other words, like, recognize it, stop, drop into it, get curious, roll forward. Right? I just think that alone can be a great strategy. So I love that one. I want to share a couple more that I
Love
see
it.
work really, really well. Yeah, thoughts about that?
Love it.
That that is spot on. Oh my gosh. Spot
Thank you.
on.
Woo.
I scheduled a coffee and conversation with the managers on my team for tomorrow. And this is sort of confirmation that this is the right thing to do, to be curious before furious, because I actually don't understand why deadlines mean nothing. And that is starting to be irritating because we all, have to be accountable.
Yeah.
So scheduling that conversation is for me to ask questions and try to understand what the challenge is for them, so that I don't get furious and react inappropriately. But so yes, we are where we're supposed to be today. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, LaDonna, like, it's about gosh, and we're all human. And like, everybody on this knows me, and I'm human too. I'm right there with you. But just that getting curious around what's interfering with meeting the deadline.
Mhm.
And man, assuming good intent, right?
Yes.
Going in curious, because our brain can create a story so fast, it's lightning fast.
Right.
But it can really hinder us from getting the results that we're really seeking. Whew. I'll tell you, this is another big one that I see, is we get overly committed to some of these needs. And I would say that if we could recognize when threats showing up and suspend these needs for just a minute, and these are the needs that I see that can really hinder us from getting the results that we want. The need to be right. I mean, whew, that's a hard one. Like, if we could even suspend the need to be right. Some people, not us, of course, that are on this call, but I'm talking about other people, may die alone, but will die right. And we get so committed sometimes to being right. Just recognize that's your brain on threat when we get overly committed to being right. This is one that I suffer from maybe more than any of the others. I mean, not that I don't suffer from the others too, but the need to be liked. Whew, that's a tough one, because, there are going to be times where you have to deliver a message, or you have to have a conversation, or you got to make a decision. It's going to be wildly unpopular. That doesn't make it the wrong decision. It just makes it an unpopular decision. And so just being able to ask yourself, when I'm getting defensive, what is the need that I'm overly committed to here? Like, and what would be wrong with not having that need met? So Ashley turned me on to a book called The Comfort Crisis. It's a really great book. The point being is, we are all so addicted to being comfortable, whether that is it's 70 degrees in the room, or I can put this number in my sleep number bed, or I can eat whenever I want. Like, there's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable. It's just being uncomfortable. And just to recognize it as such. Pretty good book if you're looking for something to read. The other is this need to be clear, this need for clarity. Well, we all know that the creative process means confusion. If you are going to create something that doesn't exist, then you have got to walk through the fog of uncertainty. It's just part of it. It's the tail that comes with the dog. And just not being thrown off by it, but rather just recognizing it's uncertain or it's unclear, but I'm 100% successful in making it through things that are uncertain and unclear. And then the last need that I see us a lot get overly committed to is the need to be in control. And, probably one of the most devastating days of my life was about a year ago, sitting outside of a courtroom when what I really wanted to happen, I recognized was not going to happen. And I think the thing that triggered me more than anything was I wanted to be in control. And it was a good reminder on that day that I was not in control and I had to be okay with that. And that was just a really, really hard thing. So, you put all four of these together and it really can trigger a lot of threat. So just, my challenge to you in that is, are there situations where those needs are being triggered? Even asking what's motivating the need? What is it that needs to be right here? Why am I so committed to being right? Why am I so committed to being in control? And, what's the harm in that need not being met? And the other piece of that is maybe asking for what you need if there is harm in that need not being met. So tip number one is stop, drop, and roll. My second tip when you're feeling those things around threat is lean in. Is there a need that I have that's not being met? That's what's triggering it. And then my third tip that I see is, there a guy that's worked with us in the past, he would call this the money slide. And I think it is so important is we've got to be able to ask ourselves different questions. Questions are the currency, really. Questions are the things that can make all the difference. So one of the questions, I've got 10 that I'm going to share with you that are like my top 10 favorite. When I find myself on fire, just having some different questions. Two that are related is what meaning am I giving this? And then the second one is even more empowering. What meaning do I want to give this? You think about uncertainty, not a lot of choice, anticipating a negative outcome. You can almost eliminate those by those two questions alone. What meaning am I giving this? What meaning do I want to give it? Be recognizing that I can give this, whatever this is, whatever meaning I want. But the meaning I give it is going to influence how I respond and the results oftentimes that I live with. So I see that a lot. A few more that I love is asking, what need is not being met here? And what's the harm in that not being met? Or is it just that I just want to be right? And sometimes we do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just want you to be super aware of it. What's the harm in being uncomfortable? Like we talk about anxiety like it's always a bad thing. Really, when you have anxiety, is your body protecting you? Why can't we give that a meaning of this is a good thing? My body is stepping up to protect me, right? But it doesn't have to overtake me. So there's really not always a lot of harm in being uncomfortable. It just is, right? So it's just recognizing, even with anxiety, I can give this whatever meaning I want. And one of the meanings is, man, my body is doing its job. Okay. I'm not minimizing that, when there's legit physical things we need to take care of. But at the same time, I think we've got a lot more influence over how it impacts us than we recognize. Number 5 is, what do I know to be true? All right, sometimes what I know to be true is that I just really want to be right. Or what I know to be true is that this is just irritating the, out of me. But I got to lean in and find out really, really what's true, because just because something feels true doesn't make it so. It just feels true. Like if we had that silly scene from Talladega Nights, it felt true to him that he was on fire, but he wasn't. So just recognize your thoughts lie. You don't have to believe every one of them. Just because it feels true doesn't make it true. A few more that I love is what's mine to own here and what isn't. Because one of the ways that we can trigger threat is like over owning things that were never ours to own in the first place. And I'm the world's worst here. I'm codependent poster child. I mean, all day long. And I know that I'm still working on it. But recognizing where might I be working harder for someone's success than they are. And I'm a master at doing that. Another question that I love is, does this deserve my attention or my energy? Because I will tell you, you wake up with this precious commodity every morning called your energy. That's what's driving your production, your creativity, all the things. And we don't want to just randomly hand it out. So in the past, I've actually used a clip of a lady opening up the door, and it was during Halloween, and all these kids running by and getting all the candy they want. Sometimes that's what we do with our energy. We just open up the door and hold it out there and say, take whatever you want, when it's actually the most precious thing that we have, because it's what's going to allow us to accomplish what we want to accomplish. I have three more here that I love. What serves the greater good is oftentimes a great question to ask. So what serves the greater good when you're sitting on your porch one Saturday morning, having a cup of coffee, and it's a beautiful Saturday morning, and you get a call and it's a family member that is yelling at you and, effing this and effing that. Hypothetically speaking, that could happen. But it's just recognizing what serves the greater good here. Sometimes the greater good is best served by letting it go, like let it go. Sometimes it means lean in and get mad, so it's not saying, it's just helping you be more in a place of being so intentional of how you're dealing with this circumstance in the moment. Number 9 is, how might this be happening for you and not to you? When you look back over the course of your life, if we could do a whole timeline, in those moments that felt like a setback, it actually might have been the greatest thing happening. You can look back over your life and see multiple times of that. So just leaning in, and how might this be actually opening up an opportunity? These are definitely things you deal with, when you're self-employed, for sure. Like, when you don't get the proposal or you don't get the contract, like, you can go to that place of gloom and despair. But staying there is not going to help anything. So it's easier to lean in and say, kind of, what's the light, the love, and the lesson in this situation right now? Let me take that. And then the number 10 that I think is just maybe the most powerful. And if you want to grab a screenshot of this, please do, to have it in your pocket. But how do I respond to this circumstance or this event in alignment with who I want to be and the results I want to create? Because how you respond to that's going to drive every other thing. So sometimes the stop, drop, and roll, sometimes check your needs. How committed are you to those 4 needs? And then sometimes just having a different question can open up new possibilities and get you back on the road. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. And I just want to wrap with this one thing that I say a lot to my coaching clients. Let's look in the mirror before we start looking out the window at everybody else. Because if we could just remember that your first step is not to look out the window, your first step is to go to the mirror and really think about, what's this teaching me? That's where real change happens. And where you start to see success is that you stayed less time than you did last time in that place. I love just that measure alone can go a long way. So anyway, as I wrap here, don't suffer in silence, okay? There are people, we're one of those people. We're in your court, right? Reaching out and saying, man, I got to work through this situation. So, suffering is optional. So just knowing that threat is the biggest line item in any company's budget. It's just invisible, but it's there. It 100% is there. And just like, you know, we pay unnecessary taxes when there's low trust, we pay incredibly unnecessary taxes when there's high threat. And the faster we can move through that, the fewer taxes, the fewer frustrations that we have to experience. So take a couple of these ideas, put them into action, and then, you know, just shoot me a text or email. Let me know, how did it make a difference? And because we can lead, learn, and live the way the brain works best, and we can get better results with less effort, or we can make the hard a whole lot harder. And some of us are brilliant at bringing the hard. Okay. So guys, have a fantastic day. Thank you for jumping on with me. I'm going to just hit pause.